Again, this is week 5. If you listen to module 1 first, then you know that we've completed our review of trauma and stressor-related disorders. Here in this module, module 2, we will delve into understanding personality disorders. The format for learning about personality disorders is going to be the same as before. We're going to begin with a general overview of what constitutes a personality disorder. Then we're going to review the distinct disorders, understanding them in clusters. Okay, so again, when we have the general descriptor, that tells us this is a common feature that all of the disorders in this category are going to have, but there will be variations specific to the respective disorders. A personality disorder represents an enduring pattern of behaving that deviates from whatever the general culture is. That manner of behaving permeates, meaning it is widespread, always present, always active. It is not episodic. The manner of behaving is inflexible, okay? And what this means is despite a situation not working or that manner of behaving and presenting creating problems, the behavior and the personality persist for that individual. The symptoms tend to be stable over time, and they don't often change. This is one of those things that people say, oh, can we really help individuals with personality disorders? And that is because of the stability of the symptoms, that they seem to be rather fixed. Impulse control may also be an associated feature for personality disorder. And as we move through these, that will hopefully make a bit more sense. As mentioned, personality disorders are understood as groups or clusters of personalities that share similarities. So cluster A, for instance, entails personality traits that are referenced as odd or eccentric, while cluster B comprises disorders of a dramatic, irrational, or erratic nature. And then your cluster C personalities are going to share an anxious and fearful nature. Regardless of whether or not it's anxious, fearful, irrational, erratic, or odd and eccentric, it is going to permeate. It is not going to shift because of situation or the difficulty or harm that it creates. These personality traits endure. So in cluster A, we have paranoid personality disorder, schizoid personality disorder, and schizotypal personality disorder. Cluster B, the dramatic, irrational, and erratic set of personalities includes antisocial, borderline, histrionic, and narcissistic personality disorders. And then finally, cluster C entails avoidant, dependent, and obsessive compulsive personality disorders. All of these have a fearful, anxious bent to them. Now, the obsessive compulsive personality is distinct from obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. So we've learned about OCD, but this is going to be different. And so hopefully when we complete our understanding of personality disorders, you will see how they are distinct. Let's delve into the odd and eccentric personality issues. This group is described in this way because the mannerisms of the disorder evidence behaviors that are unusual or out of sorts with the personality features of the general population. Unusual personality disorder is unusual in presentation and manner because it's represented by a pervasive distrust regarding the motives of other people. It's important to note that this suspiciousness is unjustified. It's unmotivated by any external indicator. Still, the doubts persist. Okay. Additionally, with this personality type, there's the perception that others are out to attack, right? That they are demeaning or insulting the sufferer, even though, again, there's no supporting evidence. These, however, are the perceptions, right? That this person is out to attack me or they are insulting me in some way. Importantly, the paranoia and the suspicion are not a function of schizophrenia or psychosis. So that distinction is there because we know, or you'll come to know, that there are groupings of psychotic disorders, and schizophrenia is part of that. Paranoia is part of schizophrenia, or can be, right? So this is a personality disorder absent of the symptoms that are associated with schizophrenia that we'll learn about. So when you're hearing paranoia, you'll want to pause and give thought and question the client, but give thought to whether or not you are hearing delusions and psychosis, because then that might suggest a psychotic disorder and not this personality disorder. Okay, so in other words, the person is not delusional. They are not psychotic. The suspicion is separate from that, but it's unmerited. So when we're thinking about this in terms of a disorder, again, there is this persistent sense that somebody is out to get them, right? But it's unjustified. All right. Next in the odd and eccentric category is schizoid personality disorder. I'm not sure if you've heard of schizoid personality. It's not one of the ones that is often talked about and discussed, but this is an individual who is socially detached across the board, not just in social situations. I'm going to take our thoughts back to social anxiety disorder, where the predominant feature is anxiety, right? So when we hear social issues, social engagement, we're trying to determine, is it because the person is concerned about negative evaluation? If so, we're back in an anxiety circumstance, because out of that concern for negative evaluation, the person has fears about engaging socially. A person with a schizoid personality type is socially detached. They have limited demonstrative emotion, and either they don't enjoy relationships or they're disinterested in being in relationship with others, right? They're disinterested in the relationship, unlike what would happen in a social anxiety where the individual would desire to be in relationship, but because of fears related to evaluation, become isolative. Here, the person's really not interested in relationships, and so attachment with other people is likely non-existent. Now, schizotypal is different from schizoid because while it is a pervasive pattern of social deficiency, it's different from schizoid because of the desire to be in relationship. However, the social ineptitude and oddity make this difficult, and sadly, there is discomfort with not being in the relationship. Okay, so the thinking of a person with a schizotypal personality disorder is odd. Their beliefs are odd or peculiar. They have magical thinking that might be endorsed along with ideas of reference. I talk a little bit about, just so you know, what magical thinking is, and I define that for you at the bottom. Along with ideas of reference, that perspective that everything is about them, right? So again, this is a person who wants to be in relationship, but is really odd socially. They're inept at engaging, and the way that they think is peculiar and often sort of off-putting or unusual for other people. Social anxiety is certainly a hallmark feature, but not because, again, of fear of being negatively judged, but because the social discomfort that results in the person having few friends and limited ability to socialize well. Very different causes here. And again, not just relegated to social situations across the board. Of the personality disorders in this category, schizotypal is dually characterized rather as a personality condition. And it is part of the schizophrenia spectrum, with some people believing that schizotypal is prodromal to schizophrenia. Prodromal meaning precursor, or the period between the appearance of initial symptoms and then the full development of symptoms. In this case, schizophrenia. So this one is both personality as well as being on the schizophrenia spectrum, which we will get to. Okay, so I'm hoping that you understood me to say that when you see this social ineptitude, it may be present before the full development of a schizophrenia becomes obvious. So when you go back and you gather history, even if you're not seeing the specific schizophrenia symptoms that include the psychosis and the delusions, you may see this first and then that develop later. Okay? So hopefully you're understanding the distinction between a schizotypal and a schizoid personality. Again, schizoid, they're not really interested. They're not attached to people. They're more the loner type, perhaps. But the schizotypal is just not good in social circumstances. And there is paranoia and eccentricities and unusual and peculiar thinking that really becomes hallmark for their inability to be socially conforming. Our second grouping of personalities disorders includes those personality types defined by dramatic and irrational behavior and thinking. You likely have some familiarity with antisocial personality disorder. It's sort of commonly used language where perhaps we think we have an understanding, but this disorder represents behaviors where there is really utter disregard for other people's rights. In fact, other people's rights are likely violated. There's the presence of aggression and irritability and a non-conformity to societal rules and guidelines. And importantly, there's no remorse when the rules are broken. It's all about that person. They don't really care about other people. On the surface, these individuals can be quite charming with an inflated sense of who they are in relation to other people. So they tend to see themselves as important and above others. When we're thinking about diagnosing an antisocial personality disorder, this would not be diagnosed in childhood. If there are similar traits that seem to be evident in childhood, then the disorder that we would most likely render would be conduct disorder. And we'll get to understanding specifically what conduct disorder is. But it's important to note that many of the individuals diagnosed with PTSD had conduct disorder as children. However, the opposite is not true, meaning if a child has conduct disorder, it is not necessarily the case that they go on to develop antisocial personality disorder. Okay, so when you're working with a child and you know that there is a conduct disorder diagnosis, we really want to intervene. It's not absolute that that could develop into a personality structure like an antisocial, if not managed and wrangled early on. But we know that many of the people who have antisocial personality disorder had conduct disorder. Okay, so these are those superficially charming individuals who highly regard themselves, don't really care about others' rights, and are usually not rule followers. They don't really care about the rules because they don't apply to them. They are above the rules. Borderline personality is also likely popular and likely overused colloquially when we indicate that, oh, this person is borderline, right? So I want to make sure that we have a good understanding of this so that we are diagnosing properly. With this disorder, as with the others, there is a pervasive pattern. Okay, that's consistent for all. There is a pervasive pattern of unstable relationships that usually result in great difficulty with emotion regulation because there are such strong worries with a person with borderline, strong worries about being abandoned, the need to sort of remain in relationship can have negative impacts on the interpersonal relations. They're questioning the other person. They're untrusting of the other person's regard for them because there is the worry that, yeah, you say you love me, but you're going to leave. You're going to abandon me. Okay? Many individuals with this disorder may inadvertently then sabotage relationships or even walk away from them to avoid the hurt of being left, right? So they're doing things intended to draw the person in, but it inadvertently sort of pushes them away, the other person away, or they leave knowing in their minds, even if it's not accurate, this isn't going to last. It's easier for me if I leave versus being left. So oftentimes the intent of the other person is misread, and it's that back and forth, that tug and pull on the relationship that leads to that exaggerated emotion and dysregulation of emotion. So, the fear of abandonment can lead sometimes to self-harm and even suicidal threats. I know a lot of times individuals with borderline may self-injure. It is not the case that just because a person is engaging in self-injury that they have a borderline personality disorder. It may be one of the traits that we are most familiar with, but I want to caution with any of the disorders that we don't get caught up on a single symptom. It is a constellation of symptoms, and self-harm is just one of the symptoms. Okay? In all, great effort is expended with this disorder in attempting to avoid abandonment, which often translates for the sufferer as being bad and unlovable. Despite being in relationship, a feeling of emptiness can sometimes still be felt because, again, the person isn't really trusting of the firmness or solidness of the relationship. And so, even though they're in it, there may still be that sense of unease and emptiness, and the emotional back and forth of the emotional volatility can tax a relationship. When we're thinking about who might have or how this might develop, we're thinking about individuals who likely were not affirmed early on, where a solid sense of who they are was not established, nor were relationships consistent. So there is a lot of literature to help us understand the impetus for this sort of erratic personality style. And so, like I mentioned, the correlation is found in early family dynamics with early painful and fearful experiences of relationship uncertainty, a depreciated sense of self, and unfulfilling and non-sustaining emotional exchanges. So we can understand how that would lend itself to a person who is dysregulated in relationships and consequently dysregulated emotionally. So in adult relationships, the interactional styles of the childhood may play out. A childhood relational experience of being poorly defended, let's say, or unaffirmed can create a low frustration tolerance for even minor shifts in relating or the relationship. And because of this, in adulthood, relationships feel unstable and they feel fragile, which creates that dysregulation and volatility in relationships. Histrionic personality, also in this erratic and dramatic cluster B disorders, is a pervasive pattern of extreme emotion and mood shifts and attention-seeking behavior. Now, I know that sounds a bit like borderline personality disorder, but this attention-seeking element is significant here. The person needs to be the center of attention, and they may also feel more intimacy or assess rather more intimacy in relationships than is actually present. They can immediately become best friends with somebody they just met, or imagine that somebody is emotionally invested in them when really that's not the case. So the feelings of this person can seem to turn off and on, which could have the person appear disingenuous. Okay, so it's that excessive emotionality. We're so great together. This is so awesome. You're my best friend. And it's like, we just met a couple of weeks ago. That is concerning to me that so quickly you have assessed intimacy in the relationship and that you need to be the center of attention. We can see how that could come off as disingenuous because the relationship advanced far quicker in the sufferer's eyes than is really present for the other person in the relationship. Okay, we all probably feel like we know somebody who is a narcissist. That person who thinks only of themselves, thinks of themselves in grandiose ways, right? Who is very arrogant, um, and tout high accomplishments or exaggerate the accomplishments that they have. We can see that there are some similarities here between, so far, the narcissist who thinks highly of themselves and the person with antisocial personality disorder. The high self-regard on an antisocial side makes people disregard other people, rules, so forth. Here, the narcissism is around this belief in a position of superiority over other people, where other people should listen and take direction. With this personality disorder, others are easily and often taken advantage of, and there's no empathy for the other person. You're here for my benefit. On the other side, anti-social, like I'm here to disregard you, mistreat you, abuse you, because I don't really care about you, and oh, that rule doesn't apply. Here, individuals act out of their arrogance for their own benefit without regard for other people. Males are going to be 50 to 70% more likely to present with narcissistic traits than will females. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some understanding of the narcissist and their sense of entitlement. All right, we're going to move to the last part, which is our cluster C personality disorders that describe fearful and anxious traits. Avoidant personality disorder has as its primary feature a long-standing sense of inadequacy, that the person believes other people agree with. And this sense of inadequacy plays out in them being socially isolated and reserved, and where there is an extreme sensitivity to what other people might think. Okay. The person usually avoids most things, not just social interactions, but anything that involves significant interpersonal contact is going to result in this fear of criticism, disapproval, or rejection. So they're most unlikely to get involved with other people. They engage restraint in intimate relationships because of some fear of being shamed or ridiculed. And they view themselves as socially inept, inferior, unappealing. So you can see how these are internal beliefs about who the person thinks they are, right? They don't feel capable. They feel that they might be criticized and so become self-critical about something that's going on inside of them versus some external, I may not be able to manage this relationship well. The focus is that something is wrong with me. I am inadequate in some sort of way. I know you may be thinking this seems really similar to a social anxiety disorder, and in a lot of ways it is. However, the person here really believes that they are inadequate in some sort of way. There is an internal belief of being less than, and out of that, they are avoidant. And again, not just socially, this could happen occupationally, across the board, because somebody's going to be able to see what is insufficient in me. And so I need to just avoid people, circumstances, situations altogether because of an ineptness. I know I've already shared some differentiating symptoms between social anxiety and avoidant personality disorder, but I wanted to include this slide here so that you have some things written out to really help you understand the two. So let's go through this. Social anxiety is an anxiety condition. Anxiety and fear are the driving features, so it involves high levels of angst. There is the recognition with a social anxiety disorder of the disproportional nature of the fear to the circumstance, okay? And the social anxiety may involve avoidance of a few specific things like speaking in public or being in front of a crowd when the person might be negatively evaluated. In contrast, a person with an avoidant personality disorder really avoids insight about their thinking, okay? And the fears are really driven by this overwhelming feeling of worthlessness and inadequacy that they believe is core to who they are, that they also believe that others think about them, okay? So, avoidant personality disorder involves avoidance of most or all social areas of life, not just these specific things where, oh, I have to walk into the room late or I'll arrive late. I don't want to do that because I don't want people to maybe judge my outfit or whatever. This is across social arenas. For some, avoidant personality might be more extreme and an expanded version of a social anxiety, but both disorders can occur absent of the other. So just because you have a social anxiety disorder does not mean that you have a avoidant personality disorder, nor is the opposite true. You can have an avoidant personality disorder without being socially anxious. So hopefully that helps some in differentiating the two. Moving on to dependent personality disorder. Again, like the others, it is pervasive, and it's a pervasive need to be taken care of where others are allowed to take the lead, where the individual who suffers with this engages submissive behavior. There are strong fears of separation or abandonment. So this is somebody who's going to have a hard time making decisions, and they're going to lean on other people to make decisions for them. They're going to seek nurturance and support. There are exaggerated fears here as well. But the fears about being unable to take care of self are really unrealistic. Usually, this person allows another person to lead, but interestingly, if something goes wrong, will often rail against that person. So the dependence has this sort of love-hate thing going on about it. The person relies on the partner heavily, but then hates that they have to rely on the other person. And then, although giving over control, blames the other person if something goes wrong. Okay, so that's our dependent personality, and hopefully that adds to what you read in our textbook. So finally, we are at the last disorder of the personality disorders, and that's obsessive compulsive personality disorder. which is akin to being a perfectionist, right? And so that's different from OCD, which is obsessive thinking followed by compulsive behavior. Here, this is a pervasive need for everything to be right and in order. It is not a fear-based thing, a fear that comes by way of a thought that has to be managed by a behavior. Instead, this is needing things to be right and perfect. This is a person for whom control is paramount, and that usually results in some inflexibility and lack of openness. So there is an intense focus on rules here, on order, on perfectionism, holding rigidly to rules and guidelines, and being really stubborn about doing things differently. Like I mentioned, the focus is on being good and right and being a rule follower. Individuals who have this personality disorder are sometimes, I think, equated to people who have what is referenced as a type A personality. So they don't waste time. Everything is very specific. If I'm going from point A to B, if there's something I see along the way, I'm going to take care of that as well. We're not going to, take extra steps. We're going to be very efficient and proficient in what is done. And so leisure time really feels like laziness, and people with obsessive compulsive personality sometimes feel uncomfortable resting. Okay. And finally, they are mercilessly self-critical, and judgmental about themselves, and sometimes hold other people to those same standards that they hold for themselves. So this concludes personality disorders. Again, we have the three clusters, cluster A, B, and C. We have your odd and eccentric, your anxious and fearful, and then your erratic and dramatic. So when you're thinking about the disorders, it may help to think about those categorizations so that you could remember which is included in each of the clusters, because they're going to share some central features. Okay? All right. Thank you.